Let me tell you something that the mental health industry, the therapy culture, and every vulnerability is strength influencer on the internet does not want you to hear. Being emotional is costing you. Not in the small, manageable ways you've already accepted, not just the argument you lost because you got too heated, not just the negotiation that went sideways because they saw you sweat. In every way that actually matters. In boardrooms, in relationships, in courtrooms. In the quiet moments where power shifts from one person to another and neither of them says a word. Emotional people are losing systematically, predictably, invisibly. And the most devastating part is that most of them have been convinced that their emotionality is a strength. That feeling deeply makes them more human, more authentic, more connected. And maybe it does, but it also makes them readable, predictable, manageable. And in a world where power belongs to whoever controls the frame, readable is the most dangerous thing you can be. This is not a conversation about suppressing your feelings. This is not a conversation about becoming a robot or cutting yourself off from your humanity. This is a conversation about what is actually happening psychologically, socially, when you lead with emotion in situations that require power, and why the people who understand this dynamic almost always win, and why the people who don't almost always lose. If that makes you uncomfortable, stay with that discomfort. Because that discomfort is exactly the kind of signal your nervous system sends when it's about to learn something that will permanently change how you operate. Here is where we start. The human brain under emotional activation does something that is catastrophic in high-stakes situations. It narrows. This is called emotional tunnel vision, a well-documented neurological phenomenon where the activation of the limbic system, specifically the amygdala, begins to suppress the prefrontal cortex. The prefrontal cortex is where your strategic thinking lies, your long-term planning, your ability to read a situation from multiple angles, to anticipate consequences 3 moves ahead, to regulate your impulses in service of a larger goal. When you get angry, when you get hurt, when you get anxious, when you get desperate, your brain physically reduces its capacity for the kind of thinking that wins. You become, in the most literal neurological sense, less intelligent. Not permanently, not irreversibly, but in exactly the moment when you most need your full cognitive capacity, the emotion removes access to it. And the person across from you, if they are calm, if they have learned to manage their emotional state, retains full access to theirs. They are playing chess. You are reacting. And reaction in power dynamics is always a losing position. Now let's talk about what emotion communicates to the people around you, because this is where it gets truly dark. When you display strong emotion in a situation involving competing interests, you are not communicating what you think you're communicating. You think you are communicating the importance of the issue, the depth of your investment, the sincerity of your position. What you are actually communicating to every person in that room who understands power dynamics is this: I can be moved. I can be provoked. I've exposed the thing that matters to me most. And if you know what matters most to someone, you know exactly where to apply pressure. You know exactly what to threat. You know exactly what to offer. You have handed the other person a map of your vulnerabilities and called it authenticity. And they will use that map, not always consciously, not always maliciously, but the dynamic is established the moment the emotion surfaces. You have revealed your hand. They get to play theirs hidden. Think about every negotiation you have ever been in, professional or personal. Think about the person who stayed calm, who asked questions in a measured tone, who let silence sit without rushing to fill it, who responded to provocations with a slight nod and nothing more. And think about the person who got frustrated, who raised their voice slightly, who said things like "this is so unfair" or "I just need you to understand," who visibly needed the outcome. Which person had more power in that room? You already know. You've always known. The calm person was not necessarily smarter. They were not necessarily more experienced. They were not even necessarily right, but they were unreadable. And unreadable people hold power in interpersonal dynamics the way a locked vault holds value. not because of what's inside, but because no one can get to it. Here is the mechanism that most people miss, and it is the most important thing in this entire conversation. Power in human interactions is not primarily about resources or status or formal authority. It is about need. Specifically, it is about who needs the outcome more. And emotion is the most visible signal of need that exists. When you cry in a meeting, when you snap at someone who questioned your work, when you go quiet and cold because someone didn't respond the way you wanted, when you over-explain your decisions to people who didn't ask for an explanation, every one of those behaviors broadcasts the same underlying message. I need this. I need your approval. I need this to go a certain way. I need you to see me differently. And the moment someone else perceives that you need something from them, whether it's validation, agreement, a particular outcome, or simply the relief of their acceptance, you have transferred power to them. They now have something you want. You have nothing they need. The asymmetry is complete. An asymmetric need is the foundation of every power imbalance that has ever existed in human relationships. Let's get specific, because abstract principles are easy to nod at and hard to apply. Think about the workplace dynamic first. The person who gets visibly upset when criticized is the person whose manager learns exactly which buttons to push to destabilize them before a difficult conversation. The person who goes out of their way to show how hard they're working, how stressed they are, how much they care, they think they're demonstrating value. What they're actually demonstrating is that they're already giving everything they have, which means there's nothing left to negotiate with. The person who walks into their annual review calm, unreadable, present but not desperate, that person maintains leverage because no one knows where their floor is. No one knows what they're willing to accept. No one knows what would make them walk away. And that uncertainty, that opacity, is worth more in a power negotiation than almost any other resource you could bring to the table. Now the relationship dynamic, and this one is going to be harder to hear because it runs directly against almost everything we're taught about love and intimacy. In romantic relationships, the person who feels more is not always the person who loves more, but they are always the person with less power, not because love should be, not because vulnerability is inherently weak, but because the distribution of emotional investment in a relationship directly determines who has the greater need, and therefore who has less power to define the terms. When you love someone desperately, when your peace depends on their mood, when you restructure your behavior to manage their emotional state, when you stay in situations that are clearly not serving you because the fear of losing them is louder than your own self-respect, you are not in a relationship. You are in a hostage situation where you are both the hostage and the one who built the cell. The emotionality is not the love. The emotionality is the fear. And fear is the most power-surrendering emotion that exists. The people who have studied this, the researchers, the therapists, the negotiators, the strategists, call it emotional leverage. And it is real. It is documented. It operates in every domain of human interaction. When one person can reliably produce an emotional response in another person, they have leverage over that person. Full stop. It does not matter how intelligent you are. It does not matter how much status you have. It does not matter how right you are. If someone has learned, through observation or through deliberate manipulation, that a particular trigger produces a particular emotional response in you, they have a tool they can deploy at will. They can destabilize you before important meetings. They can neutralize your arguments by making them feel like emotional reactions. They can dismiss your concerns as overreaction. They can position themselves as the rational party and you as the irrational one. And in a world that grants authority to whoever seems most composed, that positioning is devastating. Here is something else that nobody in the self-improvement space wants to say directly. Emotional people are disproportionately targeted by people who understand power. This is not paranoia. This is documented behavioral psychology. People who are highly empathetic, highly emotionally reactive, highly sensitive to relational harmony. These are not random targets. They are specifically appealing to people who operate strategically, because their emotional responsiveness makes them easier to manage. A person who can be made to feel guilty on command is a person who can be controlled through guilt. A person who visibly needs approval is a person who can be controlled through withholding approval. A person who is terrified of conflict will bend themselves into almost any shape to avoid it. And the person who knows this never has to threaten them directly. They just have to create enough ambient tension to keep the conflict-avoidant person in a permanent state of appeasement. This is not an accident. This is strategy. And it works because the emotional person has never been taught to recognize it, because they've been told their whole life that their sensitivity is a gift, that their empathy is their superpower, that feeling deeply is a form of strength. It is, in the right contexts. In the wrong ones, it is a leash. Let's talk about what happens in public confrontation, because this is where the power loss from emotionality is most visible and most consequential. When someone challenges you in a group setting, a meeting, a social gathering, a public forum, and you respond emotionally, you lose twice. You lose the argument because emotional responses are dismissed by observers as reactions rather than positions. And you lose the status because publicly losing your composure signals to every person watching that you can be rattled. That information does not go away. It is filed. It is remembered. The next time someone wants to push you off balance, they have the template. The next time your authority is questioned, someone in the room will remember the time you got emotional and use that memory to quietly discount whatever you're saying now. One unguarded moment in a high-stakes public situation can take years to recover from, because what you displayed in that moment was not just an emotion. It was a window into your architecture, and people use what they see through windows. Now here is where the conversation shifts, because this is not about becoming cold. Cold is not the opposite of emotional. Cold is just a different dysfunction. The people who truly command power in every room they enter are not cold. They are not detached. They are not robotic or incapable of feeling. They are regulated. There is a fundamental difference between a regulated person and a cold person, and understanding that difference is the entire point of this conversation. A regulated person feels everything. They feel the anger, the hurt, the anxiety, the desperation, and they have developed the internal architecture to process those feelings without being hijacked by them. The emotion moves through them rather than exploding out of them. It informs their decisions rather than making their decisions for them. It is present in the room without being visible on their face. This is not suppression. Suppression is when you push the feeling down until it erupts sideways at the wrong moment, in the wrong context, toward the wrong person. Regulation is when you feel the feeling fully, process it internally, and choose your response deliberately rather than. The difference between reaction and response is the difference between losing power and keeping it. A reaction happens to you. A response is something you choose. Reactions are visible. Responses can be invisible. Reactions tell people exactly where you are. Responses reveal only what you decide to reveal. And this is the skill, the deeply trainable, deeply learnable skill, that the most powerful people in every domain have either developed deliberately or been forced into by circumstance. They have learned to create a gap between what they feel and what they do. In that gap lives their power. So how do you build that gap? The first piece is the hardest, and it is this: you have to become comfortable with discomfort at a level that most people never reach. Every emotional reaction you have is, at its root, a discomfort response. You got angry because something threatened you. You got hurt because something didn't happen the way you needed it to. You got anxious because the outcome felt uncertain, and uncertainty is uncomfortable. You got desperate because you couldn't tolerate the possibility of loss. Every one of these is a form of discomfort avoidance, an attempt by your nervous system to signal distress and prompt action that will relieve the distress. And the moment you act from distress, you have lost the frame. Building a higher tolerance for discomfort, sitting with the anger without expressing it, sitting with the hurt without pursuing the person who caused it, sitting with the uncertainty without forcing a resolution, is the foundational work of personal power. It is not comfortable. It is, by definition, the practice of tolerating discomfort. But every time you do it, every time you feel the pull toward the emotional reaction and choose the deliberate pause instead, you are building something that cannot be taken from you. You are building emotional sovereignty. The second piece is learning to observe yourself in real time. This sounds simple, and it is one of the hardest things a human being can develop. The capacity to watch yourself having an experience while you're having it. To notice the heat rising in your chest in the middle of a confrontation and think, I am getting angry right now. That is what's happening, rather than simply being angry and acting. Psychology calls this awareness, and it is, in research after research, one of the strongest predictors of emotional regulation. When you can observe your own emotional state as it's happening, you create the possibility of choice. You are no longer the emotion. You are the person having the emotion. And that distinction, as subtle as it sounds, changes everything about how you move through situations where power is at stake. The third piece is the one people resist most, and it is learning to value being unreadable more than you value being understood. This runs directly against the culture we have been raised in. We are told that communication is the foundation of all healthy relationships. We are told that if we just explain ourselves clearly enough, people will understand. We are told that vulnerability builds connection and connection builds trust and trust builds everything. And in personal relationships, in genuine friendships, in contexts of real mutual care, all of that is true. But in every situation involving competing interests, negotiations, confrontations, power dynamics, situations where someone is deciding what you're worth, being understood is not your goal. Your goal is to maintain the leverage that comes from being uncertain. The person who needs to explain themselves has already started losing. The person who is comfortable being misunderstood, who can sit with someone's incorrect assumption about them without rushing to correct it, who can tolerate the discomfort of being underestimated without announcing that they've been underestimated. That person is operating at a level of emotional sophistication that most people never reach. The fourth piece is this, and it applies particularly in confrontational situations. Stop trying to win the emotional argument and start winning the frame. When someone provokes an emotional response in you and you deliver it, they win regardless of the content of what you say. Because the story of the interaction is no longer about the issue. It's about the fact that you got emotional. They have successfully moved the conversation from substance to optics, and on the optics battlefield, whoever stays calmer wins every time. Instead, when you feel the provocation, when you feel the pull toward the reactive response, pause. Not visibly, not in a way that signals distress, just internally. Let the silence exist for one beat longer than feels comfortable. Then respond to a different part of what they said than the part that was designed to provoke you. Respond to the frame they're trying to establish, not the emotional hook they dangle. This technique, this calm, deliberate redirection, does something that an emotional response can never do. It signals without words that you saw what they were doing, and that you chose not to take it. That signal, delivered without anger or confrontation, is one of the most powerful things you can communicate in a situation involving competing interests. Here is the last thing, and it is the most important. All of this, the regulation, the composure, the strategic silence, the deliberate response, none of it works if you are doing it from a place of suppression or performance. The person who is performing calm is just as readable as the person who is performing upset, because the body communicates what the face is hiding. Microexpressions, vocal tension, postural tells, the slight overcontrol that signals someone is working very hard not to react, all of it leaks. The goal is not to perform power. The goal is to actually possess it. And you possess it when you have done enough internal work, enough sitting with discomfort, enough building of genuine self-regard that does not depend on external validation, enough practice at the observation of your own emotional states, that the calm is not a performance. It is simply who you have become. When the calm is real, when the composure comes from genuine internal stability rather than fear-based suppression, it is unshakable. And an unshakable person in a room full of people who can be moved is the most powerful thing in that room. Not the loudest, not the most credentialed, not the most aggressive, the most settled, the most rooted, the one who could afford to lose and chose not to, the one who felt everything and showed nothing, the one who responded rather than reacted, who chose rather than erupted. That person takes the power in every room they walk into, not by taking it from anyone, but simply by being the only one present enough, regulated enough, and self-possessed enough to hold it. You were taught that your emotions make you human. They do, but they do not have to make you manageable. Learn the difference between feeling and leaking, between depth and exposure, between genuine vulnerability in the right context and strategic opacity in the ones that require power. That knowledge will change your life, not because it will make you less human, but because it will make you, for the first time, fully in control of how much of your humanity you reveal and to whom and when. And that control, that sovereignty over your own interior, is the foundation of every form of power that actually lasts.